is a privilege to be sitting down with you. Thanks so much for being with us at our conference. Man, the sessions that you shared were amazing, incredible. I don't even know the words to describe them, but it was a treat to sit down with you guys and talk about what God's done in your life, in your marriage, and in your church. And for those who maybe weren't with us at conference or need a refresher, could you guys just share a little bit about who you guys are and what God's doing in your life?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, first, Logan, the man.
Yes.
Come on, somebody. X-Men. Thank you so much for having us. Your mom and dad are phenomenal. What you guys are doing here at River Valley is world-changing, not just for Minnesota, but for the Big C Church. And we're glad to come alongside you guys and help move the ball forward for the Big C Church. And so, Irene and I are doing great.
Yeah. Just celebrated 22 years of marriage.
Years.
I mean, I'm 24
week.
years old,
Wow.
so some perspective
been
there.
two.
Yeah. That's amazing, though.
crazy.
That's amazing. We're celebrating 4 years of marriage this summer.
Let's
So
go.
Congratulations.
Let's go.
Newlyweds
Marriage,
still.
newlyweds.
Yep.
Yeah,
Right?
we feel like newlyweds right
I
now.
mean, you love me.
It does feel like newlyweds season.
Yeah, it does. It's
doesn't
a good season.
Yeah.
Wow, what an amazing conference. I think
good.
it was amazing to be around a bunch of leaders, world changers, to really help them move the ball forward and kind of embrace their own story, if you will. Embrace their own pain. And man, if we can change, society, we can change churches. But man, if we can change leaders,
Come on.
I think we can move the ball down the field a whole lot faster.
Yeah.
And that's what me and Irene's life is pretty much dedicated to now. You
Yeah.
know, we pastored, I-5 City for around 10 years.
Yep.
Right? And it was great. God moved. It was amazing. But when God kind of called us out of that, we just heeded the call, through our marriage story, through, a story of redemption and recovery and really, really restoration. We felt like God was kind of calling us to really pastor pastors. And that's what we did with Union Church. Now, I-5 City, which was in Baltimore, Maryland, and right by BWI Airport, in Destiny Church, Pastor Stephen and I, we came together and had this idea to merge churches. And through that, I believe the kingdom is being advanced. Our impact is really greater. Our reach is greater. And we're better together. I know that's like a coin slogan these days. But it really started, through the pain of our marriage.
Sure.
And we were able to share that, in that last awesome session that you brilliantly gave us, the Maury Povich.
Wow.
Oh,
You know,
you're so
I've never
funny.
been compared to Maury
Maury
Povich.
Povich. Okay.
I think the only reason I know him is because
Yeah.
they probably had Vine videos or
That's
something
it.
of
Yeah.
Maury.
that's
but-
it. I did date myself there, didn't I?
You sure
Yeah,
did.
Montel Jackson. Or
Jordan.
Montel
Oh,
Jordan.
my goodness.
No, Montel Williams. Montel
Yeah.
Jordan was an
Oh,
R&B
he's a
singer.
singer.
Montel
That's
Williams.
right.
Yeah,
Oh my
Montel
gosh.
Williams.
Okay.
Ricky Lake. I mean, I could just keep going.
I don't
Keep
know who that
going.
is.
You know,
You don't know who Ricky
she-
Lake
she's
is?
like
Oh, we're old.
Yeah, we're
We're
old.
old. So, anyway, so we transitioned the church.
Yes,
and
we did.
So first we served your parents. That's an
Yes, we
important part
did.
of the story. We served your parents for how many years? Like 15, 10? About 10
Since
years.
90, well, for me, 94.
94.
Yeah.
So anyway, a lot of years serving
Yeah.
under your parents and then transitioning, relaunching the church to I-5 and then another transition
Yeah.
into Union. And what I feel like the blessing is in each transition has been we've learned
Yes.
what to do and what not to do in each season.
Primarily through what we did wrong. So now we
Yes.
can help other people with what not to do.
What
Yeah.
not to do. Because the first transition from Living Waters to I-5 was brutal.
Yeah. It was brutal, which
True.
is brutally beautiful.
Yes.
It's beautiful now.
It's beautiful
But
now.
it was hard going
but
through.
it was
Totally.
hard going through on the family unit.
Of course.
Like,
and-
it's weird to fail at succession. Like,
Yeah.
it's called
Wow.
succession.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like
It's
in the
supposed to
name.
be a success.
Yeah.
But we actually failed at it.
Yeah, there was a pull and a tug of when, timing, and what have you. But the launch of I-5, salvations, we saw so much what someone in the body of Christ would call success, which is
Correct.
winning souls for Jesus.
Yes,
that's right.
We saw a lot of that. We served the community, did great things, but there was a shift in our relationship. We just felt that the grace was lifting for
Yeah.
us leading together as senior pastors of the local church. And we just felt a burden to help leaders be the best that they can be.
Yeah.
And that starts with the individual and the marriage and the family unit, being able to just thrive through the stresses and pressures of ministry and learning how to balance it. So ministry shouldn't take us out. We're not supposed to be burnt out. And suffer through. We can enjoy ministry in a balanced way. And so in this season, we're really just focusing on ministering to pastors and leaders and providing support and resources and
And I think
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think there's seasons where, in ministry where there are difficult times. You walk through plenty of them. I know in my parents' life, man, they tell story after story after story of being a church planner and doing it. And I'm sure you guys could go back and forth for hours on it. But then, like you said, there's those seasons of joy and excitement and fulfillment. But as you talked about at conference, there's the seasons of joy and fulfillment on the church end. But then there's the seasons of joy and fulfillment on your family end. And so it seems like even what I've seen from you, Irene, the way you talk about your kids and how much you love them and excitement that you see for this next season for you is it's fulfilling in more ways than one. Obviously, the church was doing incredible things, but your ministry is going to be greater and your family is going to be greater. And I think that synergy of the call that you talked about of transitioning the church is huge. Jimmy, I'd love to talk a little bit about, I haven't known you too long, but I feel like we're great friends already. But the pride that or the sense of humility or pride or whatever word you want to use to say, I built this thing. And it was big. We at our conference talked about, I want to get to a mega church someday. You were a mega church in the mega church. You were doing it. You were the boss. You were the man. What you say, if you wanted to preach about this, you want to do this. And talk to us a little bit about overcoming some of that. And I'm sure there's still time. It was April 2021. So, it's recent. I'm sure there's still times we deal with it. But what has that journey been like? Because I think there's somebody out there that maybe needs to give up a leadership position, or they need to give up the appearance of a leadership position. Maybe their position doesn't change, but their posture of leadership changes. So talk about that.
Wow. Well, I think early on, whether it be marriage, whether it be, parenting, and there's a new season or a season of transition. Like we throw around this word transition a lot, like in church and preaching and shifting. And I think one thing I learned early on is every transition begins with an ending and ends with a new beginning. Every transition begins with an ending and ends with a new beginning. What I knew is that God was shifting our season, right? And there was a new beginning ahead of us. It was on the horizon. And I think how we ended was going to be determined by, or how we began our new season was how was be determined by how we ended our old season and vice versa.
That's good.
And so when we start thinking about those thoughts, we felt this transition. Now it was like, how do we end well? We knew that our season as pastoring was coming to an end. So, are we setting up the next pastor? Are we setting up the next generation? Are we setting up the people? Are we setting up our own children?
Honor.
And honor. Are we going to honor in, honor up, honor down, honor all around, as pastors often say? But one of the things that I think I've really felt in my spirit, in my soul, was that I was winning at the wrong thing. In other words, Irene and I have talked about it this way. Like we had fruit with no joy. Like, yes, you say we were successful by church standards and we were growing a mega church or whatever, but I think COVID kind of gave everybody a little Gideon revival,
Seriously.
But there was no joy. I was frustrated, behind the scenes. People would love, oh man, you guys are successful and you have this and you have that and you've built this kind of church, you have these many staff and this is your yearly budget. But I didn't enjoy it. And so
it became more of a frustration because you weren't working in what your main giftings were.
That's it.
And I'm literally, my gifts are very aligned to support yours. But, so I could do it. But what it was hard as a wife watching you just be exhausted and frustrated operating in a lane, that you weren't meant to be in long term. So just the freedom I've seen in you, the weight that's lifted off of you, your dad being in agreement about it, and just his dad being so worried about him. He's like, oh my gosh, Jimmy's evangelistic.
Like, he's the one who passed the church to me, and he was like, I never thought you should do it. Like,
but you passed the church.
Why'd you give it to me then?
Yeah, but I mean, he thought that was just what you do. Like, that was legacy.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so we found out, and when we went to him and asked us, like, what do you think about this? He was like, well, whoa, like, I'm so glad you're saying this, because I was worried about the level of stress you were under.
Yeah.
I was worried about, does this not fix your gift mix, being a senior pastor? I was worried about, and this is the guy who set me up for it.
Right.
But he even said, like, he thought that was the only way that he could live out his legacy.
Wow.
And
so he is just cheering us on from the front row, like Papa proud of Stephen and Zy Chandler and their leadership and them taking over, because they are fit for this.
100%.
100%. They are the leaders for the job for such a time as this. And it's an honor to do this work alongside them and support them and make sure that they're successful in what they do, and have the support that we didn't have early on.
Yeah, and what a lesson that when you say that your dad, even though he was the one that gave it to you, he saw that it wasn't your gift set. How many people are out there that think so many people, they're relying on me. They need me as a team member. I have to, if I leave kids ministry, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Or if I leave the pulpit, what's going to happen? You know, for me, I was in young adult ministry for 4 years, and I was preaching when I wanted to. I felt like it was awesome. I was living the dream, you know? And then I was asked to transition to more of a business role. And River Valley Conference is like the only active ministry role that I'm doing. I'm doing business behind the scenes. And I'm like, God, like, why would you call me to do that? Because you know my desire is to be with people, and I'm an extrovert, and I'm you know, a 3, and I want to go. And I just think that what I didn't realize was that the giftings that God was preparing for me to now multiply my dad's vision.
Yeah.
And then to be here at conference, to be on this podcast with you guys. I wouldn't be in this room today had I not said yes to a role that I was a little uncertain about.
Wow.
But the doors that God's opened, and just seeing what God's opened for you guys, and talking around the issues of race that, quite frankly, I think people just don't want to talk about because they don't know how to talk about it. And it takes people to go into the middle of it and say, guys, I'm willing to talk. And share a little bit, like, have you, when you bring this up to people, I'm sure there's a little bit of hesitation right away, but are you pleasantly surprised with how open people are to talk about it? Or do you feel like you're like, man, there's still a wall up that people are unwilling?
Yeah. I feel like it's a little bit of both.
Sure.
Right? It's not either or, it's probably both and. And I think the more relationships people are in with diverse, you know, groups of people, the more open they are.
Sure.
Right? Because they have some level of proximity, of, you know, engagement and interaction. And experience.
Yeah.
Right? And so their passion to know is to be a bridge in relationships that they already have.
Yeah.
People that are hesitant have like 2 more things to do, or another whole thing to do. They have to learn the information, and then they have to find relationships to work it out.
Yeah, it's like, who can I talk to about that?
Yeah, like there's no black people in my city, you know.
Yeah.
Or you know, I'm not around, you know, women, or I'm not around, you know, other ethnic cultures. And I like to say this, like, before diversity ever shows up in our lives, it first needs to show up in our heart. Right? Like, and I believe we attract what we are and what we're, you know, the healing of our soul and the healing of our hearts. And so, you know, I talk to a lot of pastors, and they're like, well, there's no diverse people in my city, or, you know, my church is all this or all that. And I'm like, well, it's really not about, you know, the color of the butts in the seats, but the color of the hearts that represent those seats. And if we can love everybody, if we can expand the capacity of our love, if we can expand our compassion to people that we may not ever be in proximity with, I believe that the gospel becomes attractional. Like when Jesus walked the streets, he attracted broken people.
Yeah.
Why? Because he was called to them. And so if we realize that the Great Commission is our calling. You know, it says, like, when the Holy Spirit came in Acts 1:8, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts, right? But no one wants to even get outside of Jerusalem. You know, there's also
Yeah.
Judea, let alone Samaria. We learned that today in John 4. Like, all the Jews went around Samaria because the Samaritan and Jews didn't interact. They didn't do life. But I believe that people are more open to the message if they already have some level of interaction with diversity, and a little bit more closed if they don't.
Yeah.
But they don't realize that they can be the light in their city. Like, if there's a few diverse people, imagine if your heart was receptive to them and
Yeah.
they could come to you. Like, I believe that God can use you. And here's the thing about pastoring in church. Really, we don't pastor churches, we pastor cities.
Yeah.
Our vision is not for our church. Our vision is to change the trajectory
Yeah.
of eternity
Yeah.
in our city.
That's what apostle means.
Come on.
Yeah.
And so I like to say that church doesn't start when service starts. Church starts when service is over. I don't go to church. I am the church.
Yeah.
And what did Jesus says? And I will build my church
Yeah.
through us, in us, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so when we start thinking about diversity, you know, when they started asking, when Jesus said, who do men say that I am? All of the disciples, all the people around had a version of Jesus through what they experienced.
Sure.
Some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah, some say you're this. Well, what would people say, or what would be said about people, like, what is the church, you know, how diverse is the church? Through who you are. Not the building,
Yeah.
but how diverse is the church? Your heart.
Yeah.
Through how you're receptive, your compassion. You know, not what, do people know what you're for or what you're against? I want people to know what I'm for.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of my thought.
Yeah, you talk about being unoffendable. I've heard you say that in a couple of messages, and that's not an easy task.
No.
You have to, in my view, what you've been teaching is you have to start there.
Yeah.
Because if you go into a conversation and then someone says something and if you decide in the moment, I think oftentimes we fail. But if you go into it saying, I'm going to be unoffendable, it opens the door. And I tell that to people all the time. You know, it's like if you're talking to a dating couple in church. Well, if you're in the basement, dark, late at night at 2 a.m., and you're watching a movie and she's pretty and you're whatever, bad things are going to happen.
Yeah.
But if you go into something and you go, I'll see if I'm going to be offended or not.
Wow.
It's like you have to decide that beforehand.
I like
when
that.
when I think about that, we were talking a little bit about this. I think not everyone is there. So you
No.
can say, I'm unoffendable, but other people are not. And the question I have, and I want to, you know, with the time we have, I want to ask questions. They may be hard questions, you know,
No, do
for
your
someone
thing,
to
man.
ask, but we talked a little bit about language from white pastors, black pastors, from predominantly black churches, predominantly white churches. What language difference do you see in pastors? Not necessarily the literal language that they're saying, but the message that they're communicating that maybe is a disconnect that you could help unpack. We're not going to go through all of it,
Yeah.
but just that you see when you're in churches that are
Yeah.
predominantly white, you're in churches that are predominantly black. What difference do you see?
Well, I think that one of the huge differences is just the ability to notice, right? So, like, as an African American, we have all of these things popping up. You know, Freddie Gray, we have George Floyd, we have Ahmaud Arbery. This is my reality without the news,
Sure.
right? Like, where we are in the racial divide, you know, racial profiling, all of these different things. I don't need the news to make that a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen African American pastors say, finally, and they're frustrated.
Yeah.
Do I have to teach you this again? You know, kind of thing.
Because it's my reality.
And that's my reality. And then we have some of my white friends, and I've asked them straight up, like, why hasn't this been a thing? And they says, well, I don't really want to deal with it. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. So then I just act like it doesn't exist until I have to deal with it. And I think we have to meet each other halfway, right? We have to realize that, yes, there is life. There is certain parts of my life that you will never experience. Just like Irene, there's certain parts of her life as an African-American, a biracial African-American woman that I will never, ever experience. Can you tell me a little bit about, like, growing up?
Yeah,
Like-
sure. I
like,
mean,
it's a different experience.
Yeah.
It's a different experience. I mean, I'm married and a
Black
black
American.
American man. Like, I am born in Africa, raised in both Africa and the U.S., Zambia specifically, and I'm biracial. My dad was Caucasian American. So I've had a lot to learn about Black American culture. I was completely clueless of it, and he was so offensive to my family on so many levels, consistently, offended my mom. So there was a learning curve even with us. So just, I think the willingness, what I'm seeing in churches, the differences that I'm seeing is actually white or black.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what race you are. Are you willing to consider
Another perspective.
another perspective?
Yeah.
Are you willing? Just, are you willing to come into my world and try our food? Like my husband looked at our food and where I bought it, the African markets that I would take him to, he would be like, oh my gosh, what is this? But now he loves our food.
Yeah.
And he makes it better than me now. You know what I mean? It's so funny because he was open. My dad, Caucasian American man, was open to another culture and embracing it. And I've watched my parents navigate that growing up, but the church specifically, the question is, because some of these places you go, Jimmy, people are willing or they're ignoring, avoiding.
Yeah.
And, and the season we're in the world with all of the racial trauma, repeat trauma that we've had to watch, and because we're home during COVID and we're just watching TV, we were repeatedly watching these traumas happen over and over. God, I believe good can come out of this season.
100%.
And God is using this to open the eyes of believers and non-believers
I think
to
it's
this
like
issue.
this. Like it played out in our marriage, and you would say that we're both African Americans, right? But I wasn't willing to notice. I wasn't willing to enter into her world. I wasn't willing to really act like that we were different.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm seeing. I'm seeing African-American pastors saying, notice, 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 notice. And then I'm seeing a lot of white pastors says, well, I'm not entering into your world. Let's just stay separate. And it's kind of like, no, like there's this beautiful opportunity for unity. There's this beautiful opportunity for us to value our differences. And I think that's what the conversation needs to be. As we're sitting here talking, as we talked earlier today in the green room, my agenda and job is not to convince you. My agenda and job, I don't feel like the call of my life is not to have you think the way that I think. I just want to be heard. And I think if we put down our agenda to be right, and we put down our agenda to change your mind or to make a point, we'll never make a difference until we do that. And so my thing is like, what if, Logan and I just talked and you shared with me your experiences and I shared with you my experiences and we left the table just knowing each other better without having to change our realities.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think that, man, there's so many thoughts I have, but it made me think too, my wife, she's Italian and I'm Scandinavian. Scandinavian, Minnesotans, passive, very passive aggressive, can be, but just don't confrontation. Our first time going over to her family's house, they were talking on the phone. I said, why are you guys yelling? And they were trying to decide who was going to pick up the food, something so simple.
That is so funny.
And I said, I'll pick it up. I'll go out of my way to pick it up because it sounds like this is a crisis. She goes, there's nothing wrong. I was like, what you talking about? You're all yelling.
Wow.
You're yelling on the phone. She goes, who is yelling?
Yeah.
You were yelling, and your brother was yelling at you through. I could hear him. No one was yelling. To me, that's the loudest I've ever heard anyone talk to someone because we didn't yell in our household. And so it kind of made me go, oh, wow, it's different.
Yeah.
Well, her parents, her grandparents don't speak English. They're Italian, 100%. And so that type of thing, I think people can understand it when there's a similarity, when you're willing to listen.
Yeah.
But I think at times you go, oh, well, I'm not willing to do it because they told us we're not supposed to, or that, people can understand, oh, Scandinavian and Italian, that's cool. You know? Oh, and an African American and a Black American can do that. That's cool. But once you start crossing melanin lines, I think people can't compute.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating, but I think because of, I really believe it's spiritual.
That's great.
And I think our country, and again, you're the experts on this, not me. I'm just
experts.
processing. I'm just processing out loud. But I feel like our country is, the reason why it's our country is because I think the devil knows that if our country could get this right, the church in our country, not the politics in our country, but the church in our country, the good that we could do around
Yeah.
the world. We were talking about Maverick City and just the beauty of what
Yeah.
they've been able to do. If you said, oh, is that black music? Is that gospel music?
Yeah.
Is that CCM? Is that
Yeah.
white music? No, it's you wouldn't even be able to know. I don't even
know
think about
how
that. I
to
just think
label
it's
it.
beautiful. And so that type of unity that we
Yeah.
have, I think, is so incredible. But it starts with the table conversations,
That's right.
you know. And again, I say this with fear of you know, being misunderstood. But you know, when you said, "Man, I love to play golf," I didn't assume that about you.
Yeah.
And that's something where I went, wow, maybe I would have assumed that about somebody else.
Yeah.
And I had to recognize that. Now we talk golf and we
That's
love
right.
it and we're gonna go golfing soon. But I think those are little things. Does that mean I'm a bad person?
No.
No, but I just admitted to you guys, I
Yeah.
didn't first think, let's talk golf with Jimmy. But
Yeah.
then we're talking about Phil Mickelson, we're talking
Yeah.
about this, we're talking about that. I'm like, wow, we have so much in common
That's right.
that I just didn't know and wasn't willing to talk about because I just had some assumptions.
So good.
So yeah, man.
Yeah.
If we think about
I love
like
that. Thank you for sharing that.
absolutely, if we think about like where the divide started, I mean, we can go all the way back to Babel,
Yeah.
right? And what happened with unity? They were able to get to heaven. And so what did God do? I'm going to confuse the languages because he understood that if anybody with any goal is together, they can accomplish it, good or bad.
Yeah. Nothing is impossible for
Right?
them.
So they confuse the languages. So for years, hundreds of years, you know, the languages was confused. What happened in Acts? What happened in Acts in the upper room, they were all together in one place at Passover. What brought them together?
Yep.
The atonement of sin, to celebrate that, whether they were from whatever country, right? From whatever place, red,
Yeah.
yellow, white, or black.
Yep.
And because there were 120 people together in an upper room, what happened? Unity broke out, right? Come on, they had an old school revival, and fire came down. And what happened? They began to understand each other's languages,
Yeah. Wow.
right? Which was ultimately what speaking in tongues is.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And then what happened after that? The church
Exploded.
increased.
Yeah.
3,000 was added, and then
Yeah.
those that were added daily.
Yeah.
Why? Because of unity.
Totally.
Think about unity. It's not diversity. They were diverse if they weren't after the same thing. But because they were after the same thing, God, what did he do? He brought them into relationship, into proximity, and then they began to understand one another, and then revival broke out. And then it transitioned to transitioned to their homes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have to look at this thing and say, wow, there's power in differences. Because without differences, we don't have unity. We have uniformity.
Yeah.
But because we have differences, now we have unity. That's
Yes.
different things coming together for one thing, not the same thing coming together for one thing.
Yeah.
And so I think we realized in that moment, like we said today, that diversity is the first down,
Yep.
but unity is the touchdown.
Absolutely. That's so good. That's so good. I think there's so many thoughts that I would love to dive into, but I think leaving people wanting more
Come on.
is what I always
always
love to
good.
do. And so I would love if you talked a little bit about, I know you shared a website that your guys are building and, you know, just where people can go to find more information about you guys, next steps, maybe if they want to get resources from you guys.
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, you can follow us on Instagram
Yep.
at Irene Rollins and at I am Jimmy Rollins.
Yep.
And I believe it's the same thing on Twitter.
Correct.
I'm not as active on Twitter.
No.
What's our website?
And then we have this beautiful marriage ministry that's starting, and that website will go live in July
Okay.
2021. So it's coming up in a few
Yeah.
weeks, and it's
Yeah.
going to be 2equals1.com, spelled out, the TWO equals one, spell it all out.com. And that is a beautiful resource where Irene and I are stepping into marriage ministry. And all of this is honestly, it's the equation
Yeah.
of a healthy marriage. And we're trying to even figure out how to like incorporate diversity in there because
Yeah.
it's two different things equals one. And, you know, they shall leave their mom and father and come
Yeah.
together as one. Like
Yeah.
two people equals one, like two
two
different
different
perspectives, two different
experiences.
ideologies.
Yep.
And we're excited about launching this marriage ministry. You can find us on Instagram, as Irene said, I am Jimmy Rollins, and then Irene Rollins and 2equals1.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I think for those listening, it's And for me, I think a lot of pastors in general think, I need to solve this problem.
Correct.
And I think what I've seen more of over the past year and even now in this conversation is I don't need to solve the problem. It's up to Jesus.
Yeah.
I need to just have conversations.
That's it.
I need to sit down at the table.
That's good.
And so I just encourage you, if you're listening, just who are the people you need to talk to? You know, who
it.
are the people that
That's
you need
good.
to have that conversation with? And just believe that God can do what maybe you weren't able to do on your own. And he's done it in your marriage. He's done it in your life with your
Absolutely.
church, your
That's great.
transition, and he's going to do it throughout your new ministry that I believe, I mean, it's already launching out so strong, and we've been blessed by it at our conference. So thank you for chatting with me a little bit.
Thank you
and
for
Absolutely.
having
Thank you for
us.
having
yeah,
us.
absolutely. It's been a blessing.
God bless.